Welcome to the Republican Professor this afternoon in California and in North Carolina, where our guest is. We have with us Dr. David Yamane. Thanks for being here, David.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to chatting with you.
Did I say your last name right?
You did. Well done. There's a
My
couple of
goodness.
different common pronunciations, and you got the correct one. So
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. David, you are joining us from the East Coast, where there actually is a real fall.
there is. I grew
Uh,
up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and when it wasn't until I moved to the Midwest that I experienced the joy of both fall and spring.
hmm, okay. So I totally get that because I'm in Orange County and I took a walk today in the neighborhood and I grew up in Colorado. It's just not the same. It's not the same, but I could tell it's fall. I can tell it's getting to be fall. But it's just not as dramatic as the Colorado of my youth and
Yeah.
the deciduous trees and losing their leaves and stuff like that. So,
Yeah. Yeah, we went from about 90 degrees and humid to maybe 75 and drier, and the trees are starting to change on campus. And Wake Forest University has just a beautiful southern campus with and we'll enjoy the next 2 months of wandering around campus.
so how did you go from, I know it's a loaded question, but and loaded, ooh, we're talking
Ooh.
about guns and gun culture today. How did you go from California Central Coast to the South? And is that something you wanted to do, or is that something you found yourself doing?
Yeah, I think, well, I didn't set out to do it, but as the academic job market is
Yeah,
pretty tight.
yeah,
And so,
it
I
is.
grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, graduated as an undergrad at Berkeley, went to
Okay.
the
I've heard of that
Midwest,
school.
Wisconsin. Yeah, went to
Hmm.
Wisconsin for graduate school, and then just started a nationwide job search from there. So interviewed all the way from Washington State out to New Hampshire.
Hmm.
Ended up getting my first job at Notre Dame in Indiana,
Oh,
and then a few years later moved on to Wake Forest in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And I've been here happily since 2005, but it was definitely, I'd no one really, with apologies to those who live in South Bend, no one really chooses to move to South Bend. It's not like a lifestyle choice that many people make, but Notre Dame is a great university. And as a Californian, I wasn't thinking I'd love to move to North Carolina, but every place I've lived inside and outside of California has become home over time. So I definitely think of myself as being from North Carolina at this point.
yeah. Okay. Well, that's nice. That's kind of a big change, seems like.
It,
Now,
it is a big cultural
yeah,
change for sure.
yeah.
I think it's that for me as a sociologist, being in different settings than the one I was used to from my own youth, that becomes an advantage because it's when you're out of your natural environment or the environment that you feel comfortable in that you start noticing things more. And that actually, played a role in my developing interest in guns because I, kind of went from a blue bubble in the Bay Area and
Yeah.
Berkeley, and even in Wisconsin was a little sea of blue in a pretty red state, Wisconsin and
Yeah.
Indiana. Even that little island of Notre Dame.
Yeah.
It wasn't really until I got to North Carolina, which I really started seeing, kind of normal people who happen to own guns all around me. And that went from a kind of just a personal interest and then into an academic project. So I think sociologically, if you're always around people who are just like you, there's not much spark to the sociological imagination in those settings.
Hmm. Yeah. David, have you always been empirically minded? Have you always been just paying attention to what's around you and being interested in describing it, explaining things?
I think so. I have my intro Soc students read a very old piece of Peter Berger's work on
Hmm.
invitation to sociology, published in 1963. But part of his invitation to sociology is, telling the students that, sociologists are really like voyeurs, like professional voyeurs. And if you don't have, a curiosity and an interest in what's going on around you, what people are doing and why, and how, the culture is set up the way it is, or group or whatever institution or organization you're participating in. If you don't have that curiosity, you're not going to make a very good sociologist. So I think, when I was younger, I did have an interest in why people were doing what they were doing, to me, with me, around me. uh, and my initial interest was in politics. I felt like,
Oh,
trying to solve some of those things that seemed to be problematic around me. And then I kind of, got a little bit of a sense of what the real political life was like. It was a little bit too dirty for me, and so I retreated into the ivory tower, where I could, address some of those same curiosities of mine, but not have to get my hands dirty.
David, is it true that you have a Japanese heritage?
Yeah, on my father's side, through Hawaii. So, my great grandparents immigrated from Japan to Hawaii. My grandmother and grandfather born on the island of Kauai, and the sugarcane plantation camps there. And then my
Wow,
father born in Hawaii also, and then subsequently moved to the mainland.
gotcha. Wow.
My mother, European mutt, so Scottish,
Okay,
Irish,
okay,
Welsh. We always
gotcha.
thought we were German because of her paternal family name was Dice,
Hmm.
Deis. But thanks to Ancestry.com, we know that there's not any actual German in there. So it must have been some of our Scots Irish, Northern European relatives were either taken over or moved over into the Germanic lands there and picked up that name before they came over to the United States.
Did your mother, were your father and mother alive during World War II?
Yes. My mother, I mean, barely. But
Okay, all right.
my father's born in 1930, so he was 11 years old when Pearl Harbor happened.
Hmm.
And he said, he remembers, um, some of the changes that took place shortly after that. Like, his mother, my grandmother, was fluent in Japanese. She wasn't literate. She couldn't write, but
Yeah.
she could speak and listen to the news in Japanese. And but certainly people of my dad's generation weren't keen on keeping that language up or some of the cultural practices up. And it was also around that time that statehood was coming into effect. And so when the government, U.S. government, started taking over the schools, they had to do things like wear their shoes inside the school. He always tells the story of he would walk barefooted to the school, put their shoes on at the schoolhouse door, and then go inside. And then as soon as they were out of school, take the shoes off and walk home. So it was uh, an
Was
interesting
that on Kauai?
on Kauai, yeah, the island of
Okay, yeah, that
Kauai,
would
and
have been a
why,
different experience. Yeah.
yeah. So in Waimea, it's still a
Yeah.
considered garden island, and then, at the time, you can
Hmm.
imagine how rural, it would have been. So he, I
It's
think it's
very
also
rural even to this day. It's still very rural.
indeed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's there's
Interesting.
some specific, I think, immigrant experience there because of World War II and being of Japanese descent, but also
Right.
some fairly common, immigration stories of the second and the third generation, kind of trying to move towards assimilation, and downplaying some of the cultural differences that make them stand out. So we never, as kids, we never learned. He's not
Yeah.
fluent in Japanese, of course. Myself, sisters, and myself, not at all. So
Now, did you spend your whole life in California, or were you born in Hawaii?
I was actually, just by coincidence, I was born in Japan, out on an Air Force
No
base
kidding.
outside of Tokyo. My dad
Really?
was doing contract work for the for the government. He did telecommunications work. So my oldest sister was born in Sunnyvale in the Bay Area. My next older sister was born in Germany in Wiesbaden at the Air Force Base Hospital there because of my dad's work. And then I was born in Tachikawa, just outside of Tokyo, but only lived 18 months or so there, and then family moved back to the Bay Area, and that's where I was pretty much lived most of my life and was raised in the Bay Area.
Hmm. Wow. That's very interesting background. What was growing up in California like for you?
It was where I grew up was kind of a suburb of San Francisco or Silicon Valley. People who
Mhm.
couldn't afford to live in the peninsula or in the city, but worked there, would move out to Half Moon Bay was the name of the town I grew up in. And it
Mhm.
was, about 3,000 people for most of my youth. And it, sort of geographically separated from the rest of the Bay Area. You either have to go over, we called it over the hill, but over the mountain or along the coast through this kind of winding passage called Devil's Slide on Highway 1. They've since built a tunnel that makes it a little
Oh.
bit easier to traverse. But
How far is that drive into the city?
it's with depends on traffic a lot. But if
Right.
with traffic, if you take the traffic out, it's probably a 20 to 25 minute drive into the city. Same 20-25. My dad had about a 25-minute commute over into San Carlos in the peninsula for work. So, we were somewhat isolated, which made it
Hmm.
have a very small town feel. Everybody kind of
Yep.
knew everyone. There were some
Yep.
very common last names, a lot of Portuguese, people who were involved in fishing,
Hmm.
certainly a lot of agriculture, still is quite a bit of agriculture there. We would eat these things called artichokes back in the 70s before anybody knew what artichokes were. And, our parents would force us to eat Brussels sprouts. And, now I come back and, some of my high school classmates, the Yakapis, have these Brussels sprouts farms where they're just killing it because everybody wants to eat Brussels sprouts now. But
Huh.
back then it was, they had a
That's
different cultural cachet,
funny.
back then.
Yeah, I bet a
Um,
lot of those high-end restaurants are those are his customers.
yeah. And so now it's changed. My parents and sisters still live
Yeah,
there.
big
It's
time.
changed a lot. It's a kind of place where if you can afford to move out there
Yep.
by the coast, you do. And
Yeah, yeah.
but it's
Amazing.
easy for me because I visit. I could honestly never even come close to affording to move back there.
Right.
The housing prices are
It's
just
crazy.
astronomical.
I don't understand the home price thing in California, but that's not really why we brought you on, I guess. We
It is.
we are you're a sociologist, right? You got your PhD in sociology
Yes.
from, was it just say Wisconsin, right?
Yep. Yep.
And uh, uh, maybe it would be good for us to have just a brief description of what sociologists do, just to kind of get a handle on what you have later, a little bit later. But sociologists are different than anthropologists, and they're different from psychologists. Um, how would you characterize what sociologists do?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I don't know. I mean, we could probably talk for
Well, I'm
an
not, yeah, I
hour
know.
just on that topic. But
Sure, I'm sure. Yeah, yeah.
I think
Sorry to
that
torture you.
no, no, I mean, might be torturing the listeners with more than me, but I think you know, some of the disciplinary differences that we have are kind of real, and a lot of them are the product of, institutional politics and the economics of education and that sort of thing. So, um, some of the distinctions that we make between the social science disciplines of political science, economics, anthro, psych, um,
Right.
are real and substantive, and a lot of them, are strictly disciplinary in the sense of, we draw those boundaries somewhat artificially. But,
Mhm.
I like to think and I was told by one of my mentors, Robert Bello, when I was coming out of Berkeley, I told him I was going to graduate school in sociology, and he said, "That's great. There's nothing that you can't study as a sociologist." And so, there's this old 18th century idea of sociology as being the queen of the social sciences, because it is so encompassing. So,
Yeah.
I say it's really studying anything from, sort of two people interacting, the dynamics of face-to-face interaction, all the way up to, global economic and political processes. It can be contemporary, it can be historical. So, the boundaries of sociology, I think, are quite wide, as long as you're talking about, more than just trying to get inside of one person's head. So, I think there is a social psychology, but a lot of psychology focuses on the individual. Anthropology, I think historically, was the study of sort of remote places, or the developing world, or
Yeah.
other
True.
cultures. But that distinction is sort of broken down, as sociologists study the developing world more, and anthropologists study the modern world, or the first world more. So that line gets a
That's
little bit
interesting.
blurred.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a political sociology, there's political science. I think that there's a
Right.
lot of collaboration that goes on. You take someone like, Theta Skocpol. Is she a political scientist, or is she a sociologist? Kind of hard to say. Um,
There's a
so
there's a lot of things in about human groups that puzzle me. Because I've taught logic for 15 years. And uh, what I take myself to be doing when I teach logic is helping people become more in tune with, or at least aware that there's a way to evaluate their attempt to persuade people, and there's a way to evaluate other people trying to persuade you that doesn't really attach to a group um, way of looking at things. In other words, as some people would say, it's objective. I don't usually use that word, partly because I'm not really sure what it means. But uh, maybe like an authentic, I would say, legit, as the kids say, way to figure out if the argument works. And so it seems like so many groups in politics tend to think the same way about things, regardless of the reasons that are available out there somewhere. So there just seems to be these group forces at work that I don't quite understand. And
yeah.
I I'm sure it's very complicated, but you must have some interest in that. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that there's some people who specialize in really those face to face, or those small group dynamics, and those dynamics really are structured in significant ways by status, for example, or
Mm,
power.
mm,
And I tend not to focus on those small group dynamics, but
okay.
it's it's interesting to me, because you know it's not like doing a natural science. So I sometimes say, the social sciences are the real hard sciences, because in the natural sciences, you run an experiment and the things should react the same way if all the conditions are the same. You're
Right.
looking at mechanical relationships and those sorts of things. But
Yeah.
when humans are involved, you have human subjectivity, you have free will. And so, if it's much more probabilistic, right? You can assemble the same, set of people and run them through an experimental situation, and you can get different outcomes, right? You know,
Right.
the outcomes may be patterned in a certain way, but in a probabilistic sense. And I think talk about this a lot when we talk about, for example, I used to study religion, but now guns and gun ownership. That
Yeah.
there's we can talk about statistically average gun owners, but that only accounts for a certain amount of all of the variation in gun ownership, right? And that
Yeah.
we'll never be able to look at a person, know everything we can about their background, and then be
Right.
able to perfectly predict that person's going to be a gun owner, that person will not be a gun owner.
Yeah.
We just can't
Yeah.
do that with human beings.
Wow. Have you ever been on a jury?
I have not. I've been called to for jury duty two or three times, and for some reason I've never been selected.
I noticed there's a whole industry about jury selection, and
Oh yeah.
eh, it's one of those things that, David, it bothers me. Because I teach logic, and it bothers me that I've been on a jury. I've been on a murder jury
Wow.
before. I've been actually on two different juries. But the murder one was the one that was more pronounced, and because it was weeks long, um and actually kind of a profound experience on me, sitting in that jury room. And I was surprised I was on the jury. It was in Compton. It was in California, in Compton,
Hmm.
and which is not a place I lived at the time. Um, but the idea that um, that the attorneys are looking at facts about you to try to determine whether their arguments are going to work bothers me,
Mm-hmm.
as just
Yeah.
because it's a philosophy thing. But
Yeah.
you know just thought I thought now, did you grow up with firearms in the house?
Did not
Yeah.
kind of grew up outside of guns and gun culture. If my friends had guns, it's nothing that they
Oh, is
talked
that right?
about. I
Okay.
mean, outside of we BB guns excluded, but
Okay.
if there were people, I know there were people in my community who hunted, but it wasn't like you know where you'd have trucks in the school parking lot with a gun rack on the back, or students in camo so that they could go straight from the high school to the hunting grounds after school. And so to the extent that there were guns, and I think this is kind of similar to religion at the time, that to the extent that those things existed, they were not very public. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
and that was the case also, as I said, when I went to college, when I went to graduate school, when I went to my first job. And so it wasn't really until I got to North Carolina that I started noticing that guns were a reality outside of what I might see on TV or read about in the paper. So I'd say my youth was fairly gunless.
That fits with my experience in Central California. Just the much less than yours. I went to school in Monterey and spent some years there, formative years there. Um, I was in the military at the time, so that did affect um, my living situation. wasn't wasn't exactly like going to high school there and having private property there. But
Yeah. It's
uh,
interesting, like not to interrupt you, but it
no problem.
reminds me of reading, some of Steinbeck's old
Oh
essays,
yeah, sure.
of Gilroy and Salinas, and he,
Yep.
he oftentimes will just drop in there about how people had a lot of guns and people would be shooting their guns just in an unremarkable way, not like
Right.
hair on fire, but you'd be reading about something he's commenting on, and he'd mention how the neighbor had 5 guns. And so that they're I know they're there. I know now, looking back, that they were there, but they were definitely not any kind of part of daily or normal life or conversation.
Yeah. I yeah, that's insightful. You're reading those kind of historical little tidbits are interesting. I when I read, I will uh, make note of any reference to guns in oh, I'll just give you a couple examples. Laura Ingalls Wilder, books. so different from the show Little House on the Prairie, which I didn't really watch a lot, but I
Mm,
did watch it. And I just happen to know that Michael Landon, I think, personally did not like guns. And I just noticed that in the show, I don't think I ever saw any guns anywhere. And so I was a little surprised when, as an adult, I was reading those books, and guns are featured actually far more prominently than I would have thought. Now, um, and I just, I read Hunter S. Thompson letters and stuff like that. Of course, he had a lot of guns, and he lived in Big Sur for a while. Gives a little bit of an insight on what the '60s were like there.
mm.
I just like paying attention to that. I'm just curious. I go back up there quite often, um, usually about once a year, and I pay close attention to gun stores, where they are, if anybody's going in them. I try to talk to people about it if they're open to it, just to see what their attitudes are about it. Um, Concealed carry is a big issue here in California. Before the Bruin decision, it actually still is a big issue here, because we're living
Yeah.
in a May issue state, which is different than how you probably experience it. But Monterey County, interestingly enough, is basically a shall issue county, even
Mm,
though it's entirely Democrat. I don't think there
yeah.
was any Republicans on the ballot even, uh, and for many offices there. But the sheriff basically acts like a Republican, and I'm not sure if he is, but to me, it's just fascinating that you would have a county like Monterey County with that attitude, and then you just go up a little bit further north, and it's like almost exactly the opposite, but very similar political orientation. That's the kind of thing that just I don't know. I don't really quite. I'm not smart enough to understand it, David.
Well,
But
that is interesting because I always kind of picture, from the North Bay of San Francisco all along the coast, all the way
right,
down to San Diego as kind of being blue and more restrictive. So it's interesting
right.
that there's some cutouts there. But,
Not
if you look
not
at
in
the
Monterey
whole rest
County.
of the
Yeah.
state, yeah,
And now
it's
In Monterey City, well, that would be, I don't know, obviously I haven't done any number crunching or anything like that, but just based on my anecdotal kind of observations about things, um, it's interesting that the little city centers don't seem to determine the policy for the county as far as the sheriff goes.
hmm,
Anyway,
yeah,
but I'm
yeah,
I'm like hypersensitive to like local politics like that, because in my county, in Orange County and in LA County, we've been trying to move the ball in local politics, just getting people more um, aware of how the May issue policy and for concealed carry, which is totally discretionary, how that might lead to corruption, discrimination on racial or gender lines.
yeah,
It just broke, I think, today that the LA sheriff is now under scrutiny for um, some some permits that he issued to people that donated to his campaign, and they got the permits like in 1/10 the time that other people got the permits.
yeah.
So that's
Well, certainly
corruption.
that's
That's
happening
corruption.
in Santa Clara County. The Santa Clara County sheriff, as you
I
probably
heard
know.
about that. I heard about that.
That same
So
thing, very
yeah,
restrictive issuing unless you donate to the campaign, and then hey,
right,
you're
right, right.
good. So, and that, I mean, that to me, that's not like a red blue issue. That's just corrupt political corruption, regardless of who's doing it. Although on the
Hmm.
gun issue, of
Okay.
course, the more restrictive sheriffs are going to tend to be, coming more from the Democrat side because they want to have
Right.
more restrictive issue. If you're a shall issue sheriff, then how can you be bought? You're already issuing, permits on a shall issue basis. So,
That's what I like about shall issue. But it seems this is the puzzling thing to me is because I'm in the academic world, and I'm a fish out of water here, David. I'm Republican on campus, and uh, the folks that I talk to about it, that are open to talk to me about it, they seem to be just totally unaware of the issue. So a lot of times I have to just kind of explain that background of what, when you're empowering the police to make these discretionary calls, then you're empowering them to put into force with the power of law, under color of law, whatever personal biases they have that you might not even be aware of. And
Hmm.
it might not be exactly corruption. It could be just a bias, like women can't handle a firearm. That could be a bias. And what's determining the policy is not, in that case, would be not whether this person is trained, this individual, this, or even the value of self-defense,
Hmm.
as a reason. So in California, this is what's mind-numbing about this. In California, when you go through the process under the pre-Bruin thing, well, it'd be interesting to see what happens after, but people were twisting themselves and contorting themselves in these applications to come up with some reason to carry a gun when they wanted the gun for self-defense in the grocery store or in, a park or something.
Hmm.
Just like a normal activity, going to the car, uh, going to work. That's what they really wanted the gun for.
Right.
But they have to say on the application stuff like, um, a mountain lion may be around when I go hiking twice a year up in the Sierras.
Hmm.
And oh, here's a receipt for Bishop, California, showing that I got gas there. And here's the Lone Pine receipt for the sandwich I bought, or whatever, the donuts or whatever. And the sheriff will go, oh, okay, yeah, then therefore you have a special cause. You can carry it into Ralph's tomorrow.
Right.
It's so mind numbing, the contortions that people were going through. And now the Supreme Court basically just said, no, self-defense in Ralph's is actually just as good as Ralph's is a grocery store, in case you don't know. Ralph's is same as Kroger, same as like King Supers in Denver. Uh, that's just as good of a reason as the mountain lion, maybe twice a year, maybe, you
Yeah.
know, that how many people see a mountain lion? I mean,
Right.
it's very rare, but you might be frightened about the neighborhood you live in, or,
Yeah. Well, there's,
and
that's the idea that, there are people, who tend to, so let's just say for sake of argument, people on the left who are skeptical of the objectivity of authorities like the police, when it comes to this, allowing this discretion in terms of issuing licenses to carry, are, much more at ease. Or I think sometimes when I have this conversation, it's like, oh, so you trust the police to make decisions, on whether
that's
a
what's puzzling.
black
Yeah,
applicant should, be able to get a carry. And then the basic response, not the basic, a common response is
right,
that nobody should be issued these licenses. That way,
right, right, right. Yeah,
it just takes discretion to the
yeah,
maximal level, which is,
right, right, right,
you take out any possibility of bias if nobody can get one.
right.
And then,
Of
these
course,
start.
that's not how it usually goes, though, because then Donald Trump gets one.
Yeah. Sean
I mean, he
Hannity
had
is
one.
one. Yeah.
Donald Trump had one in New York.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, so then it becomes just the very powerful get it, and it's exactly the opposite group that you said you cared about.
Right.
you know, I mean, that's the puzzling thing, David. I don't. Uh, anyway, but
Well, I mean, there's
it's
just a
never
profound discomfort with, as someone who came from that kind of background, right? If you
right.
don't have any exposure to firearms other than through the media and television, movies, that those sorts of things, that you only see the downside of guns, because the, positive and normal things that happen with guns, that's not news, right? That's not typically the subject of scholars who study guns, that
Now, why
it,
is that? Do you think? Is it the group think? or
I mean,
how
I
would you
think that,
characterize it?
yeah, I'd say for, if you think about like sociology and public health, there's kind of two groups that study guns a lot.
Okay.
So sociologists study what's wrong with the world, right? We teach classes like social problems. We don't have social no problems kind of classes, right? Or, here's what's going right in society.
You've never
And
taught that at Wake Forest over
that
there?
we don't have, it's not in the catalog. And in fact,
Intro to non-problems.
yeah, every once in a while, I mean, I think someone once started a journal, like a spoof journal called like the Sociology of the Unmarked or something. But the things that are not somehow marked as deviant or problematic, those fall outside the purview of our work, really. And so there's every now and then on Twitter you'll see a sociology professor post like, my students are getting really bummed out because I'm always talking about things that are wrong. Can someone post a link to an article or a book that has a happy ending, or kind of thing? And it's just like crickets. Or every once in a while someone will try and find like, well, this one is mostly critical but it points the way forward. Or so that's a bias of sorts. I don't think it's not necessarily a kind of cognitive bias in the way that we might think about in kind of uh, in a negative way, although cumulatively it can have a negative effect in that it excludes a lot of reality from what we study. And I think
Okay.
my initial exposure to guns was my real estate agent carried one. The guy I played tennis with had a couple. The IT guy that I knew, from the neighborhood, he had a
And this is
couple.
in North
This is in North
Carolina.
Carolina, yeah. And so, I'm
Did
like,
now
oh,
did
like,
did those people chew tobacco? Did they have tobacco in their
yeah, they was standard English speakers, and no chewing tobacco, didn't have like piece of wheat sticking out of their mouth that they sucked
no
on.
missing teeth or anything?
No, nope. So some of those stereotypes
I come
of
from
gun
a
owners.
blue collar family, everyone. So I'm describing my own family. Just FYI, I'm not
Yeah,
making fun of them. I'm just
yeah.
describing. Okay.
But this is legitimately a common stereotype that people have of who owns guns, right? People who live in rural areas, people who are less educated, right? People who drive pickup trucks, and you know, I
Me,
think
me. I mean,
there you go.
well,
So
growing up, my family
right.
basic. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I think that these are some true biases that people had, including myself. And so when I start running into people who don't fit the mold, like to me, it's either, people who
Gotcha.
use guns for criminal purposes, or,
Yes.
people who are rural and might have a need for guns because they live out in the country, and that's a kind of country thing. um to
But
be living in.
the victim on the subway didn't enter your mind because that
No,
doesn't fit
I'm
either one.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think those, that's the kind of, and those exceptional cases are easy to filter out, right? And that's more of those, I think, kind of cognitive biases that I was, sort of trying to distinguish, a bias in a discipline toward answering certain types of questions versus the cognitive biases that we all have, right? Finding mental shortcuts to reduce the complexity of the world. And one
Mhm.
way you can do that is think of, in terms of guns, it's either criminals or country people. And if something comes along that doesn't fit that, it just, we cognitively filter that out until you get too many of those kinds of interactions. And then you have to say, like, well, maybe it's not an exception, right? Maybe if I've just met 5 people in my close friendship circle who all have guns for all different reasons, inheritance from grandparents, self-defense, just for fun, but then those anomalies start to accumulate, and you kind of have to reassess those heuristics that you're using to simplify the world.
Okay. That makes sense to me. I guess when I was growing up, I didn't have that particular cognitive bias. I mean, I grew up in the suburbs, but I witnessed a crime early on when I was young that it was actually multiple times where my mother was the victim, and it was a firearm that stopped that particular thing. And I was early on. I remember when the sheriff came to the house. I remember looking at his gun. I remember seeing it was a revolver. That tells you something about. I remember very clearly it was a revolver.
Mm-hmm.
So this would put this in the 80s somewhere, which is what my childhood. And what I remember about that was when they left. And I remember the feeling that I had was because my mother was so scared and so upset, and they were gone. They were gone. And I knew that they would come back if we called. They would eventually come back. They wouldn't come back right away. It wouldn't be like within minutes. You know, it was a Jefferson County sheriff. I remember it very clearly. The same agency that responded to the Columbine shooting,
Mm.
because we were right there. I was a Columbine destroyer. That was my neighborhood. I went to the rival high school, Chatfield, but I actually lived closer to Columbine, and it was a firearm that stopped that. It wasn't the police firearm; it was our personal firearm.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, like when I'm watching stuff, I'm consuming media or whatever. I remember when I first started watching Blue Bloods, the show, the New York show, because I was curious about New York, what it's like to live in New York, and it's sort of like a kind of Republican-y film. I mean, because Tom Selleck is like this NRA guy, and
Right.
it has that feeling, this Law and Order kind of a feeling, Giuliani kind of a feeling. And the very first episode of that whole series involved illegal concealed carry on a subway.
Mm.
And it broke my heart because it revealed a rift to me in the Republican Party, which I don't like it. I don't like it. But in any case, Tom Selleck does his duty, and takes this guy who was a victim of a crime. He was a victim of multiple crimes. No police around. He carried a firearm for self-defense. He had a legitimate reason to have that gun. He knew how to use it, and he did use it. He had to use it, and then he was prosecuted for the gun charge, even though he used it in self-defense. And that's what this whole Bruin case is all about. And
Mm.
so you have this guy who's victimized twice. He's victimized by the immoral criminal, and I make a distinction between moral and immoral crime. And he's victimized by the law enforcement apparatus, the criminal justice system, which regards him as a criminal, even though he didn't really do anything wrong. He was not
Yeah.
an immoral criminal.
Yeah.
And some of these administrative crimes are considered felonies, just as bad as someone attacking you immorally. So I wanted to know, David, um, can you tell us what kind of classes you teach, and how you're exposing students? Because I follow the Liberal Gun Club on Facebook, and
Mm-hmm.
I see curious posts,
Yeah.
and I see your interaction with your students. I'm pretty sure that was you, a picture of you with it looked like a student shooting a gun.
Yeah.
Is this
So
true?
it is
How
true.
are you doing this? And
Yeah.
if so, like, how did you come to, we want to hear your story about how you got into this. And
Right. Well, so I got into the study of guns about 10 years ago. As this kind of confluence of my own personal discoveries, as well as needing, to start a new academic project that kind of burned out on doing the sociology of religion. And, the guns just seemed so new to me, as I was saying at the very start, that voyeurism that is at the heart of the sociological curiosity. So shortly, after I had studied guns long enough that I felt like I could teach a course, then I started teaching this course I just called Sociology of Guns. And when I was thinking about how should I structure this course, I didn't want it just to be a course on criminology or a course on epidemiology or negative public health outcomes. I really wanted to get at that fundamental sense I had that this is something that very normal people do. And I thought back to my own kind of introduction to guns, which was to go out and shoot under the supervision of a friend. And not because I was interested in guns, but because I was kind of afraid of them, but realized that there were a lot around. And so, I came out of that experience shooting, a little less than 50 rounds out of a 9mm handgun.
Did that
With
take courage for you to do that?
uh, I mean, it's hard. I don't know if I would. It's hard for me to assess that in myself, but I was
Were you afraid?
definitely. I was afraid. Yeah. I mean, I felt, what I knew of guns was that they hurt people.
Yeah, and they're loud
Um,
too.
yeah, you're having an
Jolting.
explosion and an arm's length away from your face. So I tell,
Yeah.
my students that quite a lot. But so that was such an important experience for me, just to kind of, demystify guns and to have some hands-on experience, that I thought what I need to do for my class is go to a gun store, have them talk about, gun technologies, how you buy a gun safety. And then for anybody who wanted to go to the range, everyone had to go to the range, but for anybody who wanted to shoot, they would have an opportunity to shoot under, close supervision. And
What's
so
this class called?
it's called Sociology of Guns.
How
Um,
often is it offered?
so I offer it once a year. This is the eighth. I'm teaching it right now. This is the 8th consecutive year I've taught the course. So I've taught it 8 times in 8 academic years since 2015 was the first time. And we always start with
The
a trip to the
administration
gun
was
range.
okay with this, obviously. Did you
Well,
have a hard time?
I didn't ask permission to take the students to the range, but I didn't hide it either.
Okay.
We had a little program where if you took students on a field trip, that the university would reimburse you up to $200 or something of the cost of the field trip. And so
Hmm.
I'd pay the range for their time, and I would basically get a check from the university for the cost of taking the students to the range. So as far as
Does
I'm
that cover ammo and stuff?
yeah, I mean, it was kind of a package deal.
Okay.
Now I don't use that fund because our fundings fluctuates. So the students pay a little bit of a fee for the range fee now. And then I also,
How many students are signing up for the course?
so the course is always capped at 16 students, and I almost always have 16 students sign up with a couple on the waiting list. Um, and
Outdoor range?
Well, we used to do an indoor range, and when I taught in the spring semester, starting in January, we went to an indoor range. But then the last time we were there, it's a public indoor, not, it's a member indoor range. I had a couple lanes for my students, and then a family came in and they were shooting an AR in one of the lanes. And indoors,
Yeah.
that was just overwhelming,
Yes, it
especially for
is.
most of the students who take the class have no background in firearms.
Oh man. Holy cow.
So lately I
Yeah.
always try to go to outdoor range. And also with COVID, I used to take the whole class all together, but with COVID, I broke them into 4 student pods. So we'd
Okay.
have, fewer people at a time. And that just worked much better. Students didn't have to stand around as much waiting for others.
Yeah.
There was less pressure to shoot. So in the 3 years I've taught, so 2020, 2021, and this year, with the 4 student pods, everybody took the opportunity to shoot a 22 caliber pistol, a Ruger Mark III, a 9mm pistol, so either a Glock 48 or 17, and AR style rifle. Um, and this includes usually 2/3 to 80% of the students never having fired a gun before.
Wow.
And so, I think this is one of the things that makes the course different, which is that, before I go to the range before we ever meet as a class in a classroom. It's the first thing that we do, and it kind of lays the foundation, an experiential foundation for the students, with firearms. And we're going to talk about, we start with the history of the normality of firearms, the contemporary normality of firearms, and it helps the students to start to understand, why do people have these things, right? Because if you come from outside of, a gun owning family or community or a gun culture, you don't necessarily understand, why do people even need guns. So this starts to give them an embodied, will see the power of it, right? Or they'll feel the fun of it, or they'll feel the challenge of it. And then they say, well, I may never be a gun owner, but I can understand why someone might want that.
Okay.
And that's a much better starting point than, just bringing them in and me explaining the history and the technology of firearms and explaining why, people have
Yeah.
firearms.
That first person encounter. Did
Yeah,
you teach it that way from the very beginning, or did you change as you went along and put the first person experience first?
always went to the range first. I wish I remembered. I mean, other than my own personal experience and how transformative for me personally that first time shooting was, I mean, I can't think of other reasons why I wanted to go to the range first, but it
Mhm.
worked so well that first time. There was whatever else I might keep or drop from the course. It was really a highlight of the class for almost every student, right? They remembered the trip to the range. They remembered, the insight that they got into firearms from this firsthand experience.
Mhm.
Whether they shot or not. Now all the students tend to shoot. So, some of them come away thinking, wow, ARs are pretty cool, or they're
Wow.
extremely accurate, or
Yeah.
that's way too powerful for any civilian to own, right? Nobody,
Yeah.
and that's fine. Like if that's what they come away from that experience with, at least they can say, that's too powerful for a civilian to own. I know because I've shot one, right?
Mhm.
And we
Sure.
can work from there to, other comparisons,
All right.
in terms of caliber or whatever. But the
Gotcha.
having
Yeah.
that as a baseline from which we do everything else in the class is really something I feel lucky that I stumbled into, because it's hard for me to imagine teaching the class without that component.
What are the other components of the class? What else are you having them read?
So, we start with kind of the history of guns. I've focused largely on the United States because that's what I know. I wouldn't be very good at teaching global gun cultures.
Okay.
But history of guns in the United States and the legal framework. So interesting. I mean, I guess we'll said this is long form, so let me tell the whole story, and connecting back to
Please
something
do,
you
because
said, which was
our audience has an attention span, if you can believe that or not.
okay. So
There's some curious kittens out there.
yeah, so you're mentioning Little House on the Prairie, and of course,
Yep.
for a homestead on the prairie not to have a firearm if they could afford it would be remarkable. To not have the firearm, right? And so that note that the difference between the Hollywood portrayal and the written portrayal.
Yeah.
So this semester, excuse me, I
Mhm.
assigned some of a book by Clayton Kramer. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he's sort of an amateur historian. He doesn't have a PhD, but he got a master's degree in history from Sonoma State. Um, and um, when the Emory historian, who's much better known, Michael Belisle, wrote "Arming America," which was the famous book that won the Bancroft Prize in American History, which was subsequently rescinded.
I've heard of that
And
story. Okay.
yeah, and he He lost his tenured full professorship at Emory University because it was determined that he had basically fabricated his data.
Whoa.
Clayton Kramer was one of the people who um, sort of brought to light these fabrications because he was reading travel logs that Belials was quoting in his book or in his articles, and they didn't accord with the same travelogues that Clayton Kramer had read, right? And it's, they were almost saying the opposite, because Kramer was reading the history as saying everybody who could afford one had a gun, right? And Belials is like, guns are very uncommon in early history. American gun culture was created in the mid 19th century by gun manufacturers, and that it was extremely uncommon for people to have firearms in the 18th century in the colonies and on the frontier. And a lot of people were just like, they love, if you were anti-gun, you love that story because you're like, I told you so. Guns weren't part of American history from the start, and it was a gun industry creation. Um,
Yeah.
but then it came out he basically made it up. So anyway, I
Wow.
assigned
Wow.
part of Clayton Kramer's book that he wrote in response to Belial's, in which he just quotes, he summarizes and quotes from these travel logs that people were writing, coming from Europe and writing about it, or people, diaries from the US, and just talking every travelogue, just saying, thank God we had guns. People would go hunting and we ate well, and women had guns in Arkansas, and that was unusual for male European writers to see. And so the students, I didn't think to set up the assignment by telling them the whole Belial story or giving that background. I just assigned them the Clayton Kramer stuff, and they're like, we don't understand why you had us read 15 pages of travelogue after travelogue that's just talking about how everybody had a rifle. And I was like, yes, well, let me tell you the backstory to that. And then that made it all make sense. But, I think that idea that if you have limited exposure to guns and gun culture, you could be led to believe from watching Little House on the Prairie or reading award-winning histories that guns weren't very common.
Yes.
And you could get that sense even today. There's a lot of people today who feel that guns are not very commonly owned in the United States, when in fact guns are extremely commonly owned. But we
Mhm.
have these homogenous social networks, right? You tend to know people who are like you. I tend to know people who are like me. And people who own guns tend to hang out with other people who own guns, and people who don't own guns hang out with other people who don't own guns. And so we have just this
Yeah.
distorted sense of that reality. So the first part
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
class, history, like Clayton Kramer's work, I have them read the syllabus for the Heller, McDonald, and now the Bruin decisions, so they can kind of see the legal framework that guides gun laws in the United States. So that I don't dwell on that. That's kind of out of my area.
Yeah.
But then bring it quickly into the contemporary period and talk about how widespread gun ownership is, what kinds of people tend to own guns. Do a lot on concealed carry, what I call gun culture 2.0, which is the sort of contemporary defensive orientation. Do a lot about the diversification of gun ownership, race and guns, gender, sexuality. And then, I do deal then with negative outcomes. So we'll talk about injury, suicide, homicide. I'll do mass shooting this semester. I don't always do mass shooting, but it's kind of current. And then finish with a little bit on gun politics. But I tend to try to focus away from the politics of guns, because I think it tends to get in the way of our examination of the empirics of guns, if that makes sense. So
I
that's
think
that's
so.
the
Yeah.
overall trajectory of the course.
Wow. That sounds like a fantastic course. And you had that structure the whole time? Or were you
Yeah.
developing gun culture 2.0, which we got to drill down into that in a sec. But were you developing your thoughts on what you call gun culture 2.0? You came up with that, right? You came up with that
Well,
phrase
Michael
or?
Bain, a gun journalist, came up with that phrase, and I borrowed it from him.
Okay,
But in
all right.
terms of in sort of academic circles, I would say
Yeah.
popularized that term.
When I hear the term, I think of you.
Okay, then it's
Um,
working.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. You're, as far as I could tell, you own the term. I mean, but
Yeah.
that's why I wanted to check. But so did you, when you were coming up with this course, it seems like a lot of work to come up with this course and get it right the first time. Um, I mean, maybe it's just me, but whenever I teach a course for the first time, I'm always just wondering what part I'm going to get wrong, and that I got to change next time. But of course, it's too late when you're teaching it. But did you have this framework the whole time? Did you have your thoughts developed on gun culture 2.0 already?
I think I did because, I started studying guns in about 2011,
Okay.
and I didn't teach this course until 2015. And I really got into
Okay.
the first study of guns that I proposed to do was actually on concealed carry. Like, why do people choose to get a concealed carry permit? What's the logic behind that? And so, as I started to delve into that specific question, I realized that it was a much broader thing happening, that it was a broader cultural movement, it was a broader legal movement, it was a historical development. And so I had realized I had to step back from that discrete focused study of concealed carry alone and take in something bigger. And I landed on what was this bigger thing when I was listening to a podcast by Michael Bain, in which he started talking about gun culture 2.0. And it just really resonated with me, right? As both as a person who was discovering guns individually, as in my personal life, and also as someone who is trying to get some purchase on what was happening around me. And it really seemed like there was a new distinctive evolution of gun culture that was present, that really did focus on armed self-defense, even though obviously armed self-defense has always been a reason that people have had guns, all the way back into the 18th century,
Yeah.
and obviously before, but in the United States, from the colonial period forward.
Yeah.
But it was never really the kind of focus of the culture as much as it is today, in terms of the manufacturing, everywhere from, hardware to software, as I like to say, training, law, economics, marketing, every aspect, I think, of gun culture really puts to self-defense at the center, even if all these other aspects of gun culture that were historic, persist, right? Precision
Yeah.
shooting, hunting, all of those other activities, collecting, those still exist alongside this, but really, the 2.0 idea, was with me from the start of my studies. And so that got built into the framework, to say, let's start with some history and legal development, then that merges with the concealed carry movement and other aspects of gun culture 2.0. And then, that takes me probably 2/3 of the class to do that work. And then, a third of the class on negative outcomes and politics.
Uh, what kind of feedback are you getting from the students? Does it vary depending on what's going on in the news, or does it does it is it pretty consistent through your 8 years of experience?
Yeah, I mean, there's always some, every student has their own individual kind of response based on their background and their beliefs. But the students are pretty open-minded who end up in the class, because I have to use a permission of instructor restriction on the course, because going to the range, shooting is not required, but going to the range is required. So I need to make sure that the students know, like, if you take this course, if you don't go to the range, you fail the course. And so the students are almost pre-selected to be a little bit more open-minded about guns, because they're at least willing to go to the range to take the course.
Gotcha. Okay.
Someone who's so opposed to guns that, like, I would never go to a gun range, that would, be something that I couldn't do, they're not in the course. So,
Gotcha.
I think the students appreciate seeing what is for most of them an alternative point of view on guns,
Mhm.
because they, are tend to be from, urban or suburban areas. And, they tend to come from non-gun owning households, very limited experience shooting. And so their dominant perspectives on guns tend to be that guns are bad. And, so they don't come away from the course thinking, oh, guns are good, but they do have that guns are bad narrative, challenged to some extent. And they,
Yeah.
you usually come away from the course thinking, things are more complex than I thought coming in. And if I can get that across in any course that I teach, I feel like that's a success.
There are so many things that are interesting about what we're talking about. You mentioned stereotypes. Are stereotypes bad? How are we to understand what stereotypes are and what are they bad? Should we avoid them or can we avoid them? Or I mean, how would you define what a stereotype is? Because sometimes
Yeah.
the way people use the term stereotype is it seems like you're just talking about your experience. It seems like you're just describing something.
Yeah. I think
Um,
that stereotypes are typically understood to be overgeneralizing.
okay.
And so that's where the kind of downside of them is that you do take from a limited experience and you generalize beyond what is, um, appropriate. But then, you start to think
What would
about,
be the harm in that? Is the harm that you're not able to see some facet of reality that would be important for you to see?
yeah. And I think, generally, like when sociologists think about stereotypes, we tend to have a sort of assumed modifier, which is negative. And so,
Gotcha.
um, you know, um,
Positive stereotypes are okay.
well, that I think that we still want to be aware of those, but they tend not to be as harmful, right? Like, if you say, you know, all immigrants are criminals, that's, a negative stereotype that can be harmful in terms of the way you might interact with other immigrants beyond ones that you may have interacted with. If you say, all Italians love opera, right? Also a stereotype, but maybe not as stigmatizing or as harmful. In that case, back in the '80s, we would, debate at Berkeley, like if a stereotype like all Asians are good at math, right? Like, is that a negative stereotype and that could be harmful? Is it a positive stereotype that is not harmful? That raises some interesting questions. But I think generally a sociologist place that modifier of negative in front of stereotypes. So you're overgeneralizing in a negative way, and that can be harmful in terms of stigmatizing individuals or groups. But we also should be aware of, like, what we're learning a lot more in terms of sort of cognitive sciences is these heuristics and cognitive shortcuts that we all
Right.
take in order to,
Yeah.
again, be able to deal with
Yeah.
a world that it's just too complicated to deal with, complexity and contingency and uncertainty all the time. So if we use certain cognitive shortcuts, that's normal for humans to do, but
Right.
possibly also, could be in certain ways positive, if we like things that are much bigger than us and have fur, dangerous, right? That probably, could be helpful if we think, people who, look different from us, dangerous, that, might not be a great, kind of heuristic to operate under.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting because I mean, just when people process what a threat is, like fear, when they have fear, could be a nervous system reaction from trauma that they have, background experience, could be just poor reasoning or whatever, but I think it's when I think of a stereotype or a generalization, I usually don't put the word all in the terms. As someone who teaches logic, all is a logical operator, and if there's one example that doesn't fit that description, the statement is false. But I think like with the Asians are good at math, that's typically I would hear it would be Asians are good at math, not all Asians. Because if I heard all Asians are good at math, the first thing I would think of is that's false. But Asians are good at math. I have to kind of interpret that a little bit differently. I think you mean most Asians or Asians in your experience? I'm not quite sure what the statement actually means, but
Mm-hmm.
it would be something like, I think I would just assume the person has experienced most Asians as good at math.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just like we grew up with Fords and Chevys, and um, it seems like they were breaking down a lot. I like Fords, but
Mm-hmm.
we'd have arguments about whether Fords are better than Chevys. But then Hondas never break down. That would be a false or true statement. Of course, it's false, but you would maybe say Hondas are good cars, and in other words, you're going to have fewer problems with Hondas
Mm-hmm.
than you have with of course, that was when I was in Hawaii. I went to school in Hawaii. I had a Honda and it broke down. So, there's always these exceptions, but and take for example how people perceive black people. It might be that if you see a tall black person in a basketball uniform who's has a smile on his face, you don't feel anything. It might be that if you see one with a hoodie over his head, it looks like he's got a very aggressive look on his face. You feel something very different. And so it's not purely the race issue. It's a host of other contextual issues that you're assimilating given your background. And I just happened to, think of that example because yesterday I was driving in a part of LA that I don't normally drive in, and the person next to me in the vehicle had a hoodie on and was not looking at me, and then the driver was looking exactly at me for some reason, looked like he was extremely angry at me. And I developed a belief that I would be a victim of a crime if I looked at him for more than one more second. And I think that I probably was right in that belief. And I don't know why, but I can't explain it, but to me it looked very aggressive to me and looked suspicious, the hoodie and looking away,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like, well, why are
Yeah.
you looking at me like that? Probably on
Yeah.
drugs. So,
So yeah, the behavioral cues I think are important. So like, I've sat in on a lot of gun training courses as part of my research because it's such a significant part of 2.0. And there is a lot of emphasis on, if you stereotype in the negative sense what a criminal looks like too much,
mm,
then you're actually going to make yourself somewhat less safe. So
true.
it's, you know, some of the things that you highlight would be things that they would want you to be aware of in terms of situational awareness,
Yeah.
eye contact,
Yeah.
facial expression, physical
Demeanor. Yeah.
demeanor,
Yeah.
like the hood. Like I get nervous if I'm around any young person who's got their hoodie up and they're not known to me and they're not making eye contact,
Yeah.
and
In the
so
summer.
whatever race they are,
In the winter
that's
time, I wouldn't
immaterial.
feel that way, but in the
Yeah,
summer, yeah.
right. So, that's where I think some of that racial dimension, is that the key part, right? Or is it all of those other indicators that are really the key part in making that assessment? And it's the problem would be
Right.
if for the person who's just like, I saw that person, they're African American, and I didn't know why they were there. That's danger
Right. Right.
versus
Right. Right.
all of
Right.
the other things that
Gotcha.
that
Yeah.
go along with that. So,
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's good. Now, can you explain or can you go into a little bit about your shooting experience? You said you had a first time shooting experience and it was transformative to you. um, that made me think of the first time I had a shooting experience, and I don't remember what it was, to be honest with you. It was probably a safe experience because I don't have any memory of it. It would, if it was
Yeah.
traumatizing, probably, but it was probably a very patient, encouraging time with trusted people, very young. And I must have, that first person experience must have done something for me. I think that maybe other people didn't have. Maybe I'm just guessing.
Yeah.
So what was your attitude toward uh, firearms and self-defense before that? And then how did that first person experience, as you experienced it and as you reflect on it, what did that do for you?
Yeah, I think, the one thing to note is that, and I found this remarkable when this survey came out in 2017, found that 70% of all American adults have shot a gun before, and so I
Did
was
you
like,
say
wow,
17 or 70?
70% of all American adults reported that they have shot a gun before, which to me, I just thought that's just remarkable because, the way I grew up made it seem like most people don't shoot guns. Um, but when I went out, I was realizing that guns were more common, to the point that, the woman I was dating at the time was in the Coast Guard. She talked about carrying a Beretta M9 as her service pistol. And, so I'm like, whoa, you shot guns? She's like, yeah, we
Mhm.
had to qualify with, the handgun and the shotgun. And, she grew up in a rural part of North Carolina. And so
Oh,
it's just like a completely different set of backgrounds. So I was, through her, I was able to get in touch with one of her high school classmates who was a trainer for the North Carolina uh, highway patrol, and he took me out and had that first experience. And I don't remember the first round I shot at all, but I do remember like there was no hole on the paper target. And so, but then kind of get over that. And then, he starts giving me little tips, stance, grip, trigger. And I start kind of walking the holes in closer to the center of the target. And, by the end of the experience, I was like, you really want to, like, whether you're doing
right.
horseshoes, bowling,
Yeah, that's
throwing
right.
darts at the balloons at the county fair, you want to
Hmm.
hit the hole in the center.
Yep.
And so, I came away from that thinking, that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I remember, one of the next things that my now wife and I did was go out and, do some clay target shooting with shotguns, because again, that challenge, that
Yep.
fun experience. And so that getting a sense that, guns are something that, someone like myself could be involved with, that was part of the breakthrough. There was like, hey,
Gotcha.
guns
Makes
are
a lot of
not
sense.
just these menacing things that hurt people, that have no use, except bad uses. So, that insight really carried forward into my personal life, and then also to my general orientation to guns in my scholarship. Um, but it also, prior to that experience, and it was sort of disconnected from that experience, was a disturbing encounter I had with a neighbor in my apartment complex, and her, she said, boyfriend. I think it was probably her, boyfriend slash drug dealer. Um, and they were having a confrontation at her car in the parking lot. And, I sort of, out of being a good Samaritan and also a naive Samaritan, went over to kind of intervene and see if she was okay. And came away from that experience feeling quite vulnerable. I had my kids with me, and it played out after that. I won't bore people with the details, but I've written and talked about this before. But
Yes.
so that kind of planted a deep seed of vulnerability in me,
Mm.
that later on, once kind of guns came to seem more normal to me, of course those things naturally intersected, right? That, how can I make myself and my family less vulnerable? Oh, guns. Okay.
Yeah. So it's a
Um,
solution to a problem. Now, the normalcy thing is interesting to me. what effect does normalcy have, or what did it have? Was that important to you to fit in? Was
Yeah,
that
I
a,
mean, I
a
think,
high
yeah,
priority for you?
I think that the normalcy, in the sense of overcoming some of the biases I had about what guns were for, and also sort of swimming around in there, like what kinds of people owned guns, criminals and, you know, people who are not like me, people in rural areas, people who are less educated, people maybe who have different values than me.
Okay.
And
So
so
you were
re
worried that you might be the one member of a new group of gun owners. And was that kind of a lot of pressure for you? What if somebody found out?
Yeah, I think that I didn't feel pressure in terms of like being, well, I mean, it's interesting. Like if you're not familiar with guns and you go into a gun store or a gun range, you do feel out of place in the sense that
It can
you
be
don't know
intimidating. Yeah,
you don't know the norms, right? You don't
sure.
know the language to use.
Yeah.
You do feel like you're obviously standing out as someone who doesn't know anything about guns.
Did you feel welcome? Or did was there an attitude at all that you picked up that was condescending or anything like that? And
Some gun stores I think are just more welcoming than others in general.
yeah,
Regardless of how much you come to realize that in retrospect, like
give us the
there are some
address and
people.
names of those gun stores. Just
Yeah,
kidding.
yeah. I mean, there's
We
just
need to police that, I think, in the gun community. I think.
yeah, definitely. I mean, there are some people who work in gun stores who are just curmudgeons or know-it-alls,
Exactly. Totally.
and
Yeah.
but when you're new you think it's directed towards you. Later
Yeah.
on you realize,
Not
oh,
very
he's
helpful.
an asshole to everybody who
Yeah.
comes in this store, right? But there's a particular gun store and range here in this area, Pro Shots range, that I think is very sort of new shooter friendly, female friendly, kid friendly.
Well, that's important.
I mean, I don't think it's perfect, but if anybody who I know, says, "Hey, where can I shoot around here?" If I know that they're new to shooting, I always send them up that way. And I think that can be really important, for people to have that positive first experience, right?
Hmm.
And um, so I had, that positive first experience, and then, the recognition that, normal in the sense that it's common, but normal also in the sense that it's, not only associated with deviant activity,
Right.
right? And that,
Yep.
good, people who are, good citizens who don't have any ill intentions, have and use these things all the time. And
Right.
so that recognition, made it sort of easier for me to say, oh yeah, I won't, stand out from my friends. I won't, it doesn't make me a deviant because I'm somehow interested in these killing machines. At the same time, I feel like there is so many strong negative associations with guns, especially in sociology. So as you know from the title of your podcast, that the academics tend to be more liberal. Sociology tends to be on the liberal side of liberal academia. So very strong sort of negative perceptions of guns. So I'm not among my colleagues in my department.
Right.
I don't hide it. I also don't, like, I'm not wearing my Smith and Wesson t-shirt, to the office.
Yeah.
Um,
You didn't
you
get any
know,
new tattoos on your neck or anything
no, yeah, no
of
gun tattoos. I don't, I don't have gun centric stickers on my door. So it's nothing that I trumpet, but I also, I'm more and more comfortable talking about it publicly. But it definitely was something that, in certain settings, you would feel stigmatized if you,
yeah,
talked about being a gun owner. And,
sure.
that was, having that sort of feeling of coming out as a gun owner, is
Yeah.
really sort of accepting that you're going to face some amount of stigma from some people. At the same time, it can never be perceived as more normal if certain people are constantly hiding the fact that they're gun owners, like my many colleagues at Wake Forest who, will send me private notes, or they'll, come see me and just, pull me aside and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about getting a rifle. What do you, recommend?" Or, "Hey, I have a gun. I own a gun." And I totally understand why they do it like that, because why
Yeah,
risk the
yeah,
stigma of
that's
being
right.
out as a gun owner? Because what good can come of it? What's bad could come of it, and what good could come of it, unless you want to like make it part of your cause to normalize gun ownership.
This all makes me laugh because I have firsthand experience of exactly what you're talking about. And well, I, let's, and I want to be as clear as possible. I'm speaking for myself on this. Obviously, I only speak for myself. I'd never speak for anybody else. But when David or Dr. Yamane is talking about what the culture is on campus, um, it a lot of folks that I know tend to just assume that um, somewhere like Wake Forest or somewhere in North Carolina, like the University of North Carolina, would be totally different than Berkeley, or that maybe Madison, Wisconsin would be totally different from Berkeley or Boulder. And Boulder is just Boulder was our place in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
But but the academic environment is it can be kind of a tight knit community in certain fields, and they all hire each other, and oftentimes have the same ways of looking at the world. And so you might have a field like sociology that is, I think it's fair to say, monolithically Democrat or socialist or something like that, left wing, definitely. Um, what I mean by that is it might be like that the numbers might be something like 10 to 1 or something in a department that we even know about. And it's hard to get those numbers because um, there is this desire to fit in on campus. There's a way that people are evaluated on campus, and one of them is being a good fit, being collegial, or and that can be so subjective. It could just mean that whether they like you or not, not necessarily whether you reply to emails, or that you do your share, or you respond to student complaints on time, but but just this whether they like you, and I'll just share just a brief anecdote. In California, in Los Angeles, right after Trump won. Well, actually, this was no, this wasn't right after. Um, this would have been the spring semester. So this was in January, and it might have been that Obama was still president. Maybe, I can't remember, but it was early on. It was Los Angeles. It was Loyola Marymount University, which is a Jesuit school, and the Jesuits are the more lefty of the Catholics. I've been teaching there for over 10 years at that point, and I wore an NRA hat, and I just wanted to I wore it as an experiment. I just wanted to see, because people who knew me kind of knew where I was coming from. I was never annoying, ever. I'm telling you, I didn't have anything on my car. I didn't have anything. Um, you know, I got this free NRA hat. It was free, and it was camo. And in the back of the NRA hat, it says founded in 1871, which is when the organization was founded, right after the Civil War. And I didn't have anything on my office door. And I'm talking about in a context where if you walk through the spaces, you will find, um, I don't know the exact numbers, just roughly speaking. I think I'm probably I'm skewing it toward the opposite of my view, just to be safe. I would say it's 100 to 1 the types of stickers and stuff you would see, uh, you know, on campus. I think I saw one pro-life sticker. And so when I say 100 to 1, I mean there's exactly one sticker on the entire campus. Maybe. I mean, there might have been something else somewhere, but I didn't see it. So I didn't have anything like that at all. And I would have the young Americans for Freedom come and ask me to be this faculty advisor, and I'd have the young Republicans come. They were seeking me out because they didn't know anybody else, and I was just an adjunct professor.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very vulnerable contractually. And my chair at the time had a plastered over his his uh his office door, this huge dramatic poster that said that basically this is fascism, this is a fascist regime coming into power, and we need to do everything we can do to stop it. This is the guy that decides whether I get rehired. So
Mm-hmm.
I wore this NRA hat. I just wanted to see what would happen. And I had the same thing happen to you, David. Well, I mean, I'm not attributing my views or anything. I'm just saying my description is I had people going, "Hey, nice, I like the hat," or I had people, and it was very unexpected. I like a math professor say, "Hey, I like your hat," so I had this encounter in the theology department, which is right next to the philosophy department. We shared the same kitchen, and this guy I'd known for over a decade, pleasant interaction the whole time, was almost dropped his coffee cup when he saw the hat. And so I explained to him, I said, I appreciate um, the history of firearms ownership. I think that they've done a lot of good work. I don't agree with everything they do, obviously. Just like I don't agree with everything in the Republican Party. I'm sure you don't agree with everything in the Democratic Party, I said. And I'm sure you don't agree with everything that Catholics have ever done. You teach at a Catholic school. Um, why do we have to always preface what we say with these ridiculous prefatory remarks? But that it was founded by Union officers after the Civil War. They had just freed the slaves, and it's a civil rights organization, and I believe in it, and I think they've done good work. For example, they paid for Otis McDonald's lawsuit against McDonald versus Chicago. They won. They won attorney's fees in that case. The taxpayers had to pay the NRA because the city of Chicago didn't want Otis McDonald to have a gun. They paid millions of dollars of tax money, and Otis McDonald was black. Anyway, so I shared all this, and it was an interesting encounter. That was the last semester I worked at Loyola Marymount University.
Wow.
Spring semester of 2017. It actually happened, David. It really did happen.
Man.
And so my little experiment, there's a real pressure to fit in, and it is real, and it has dollar signs behind it. And if you have a house payment, and your neck could be on the chopping block,
Yeah.
as I figured out mine was, and
Yeah, well,
so
that's to the point of, you people know what they could lose. They don't necessarily know what they can gain from, being
that's a
out
good point.
in certain ways. And so,
Good point.
people play it safe.
Well,
And I always tell, people, like, I'm a tenured full professor. I was not full professor when I started this project, but I was on the verge. I had the book that was going to get me promoted was coming out, and I was looking for a new project. If I was an untenured assistant professor or a term, professor or anything like that, I
yeah,
would not be doing what I'm doing for sure. It would just, maybe it would be okay, but the
yeah,
chances of it not being okay. And, and if I, think about moving, for Wake Forest, is I'm not, hello, provost, I'm not thinking of moving. I don't want to move. But, I'm knowing the position I take towards the study of guns doesn't put me anywhere in the mainstream of sociology. And so I'm much less mobile than
But
if I,
yeah,
did guns and the death of American democracy, or, guns and the rise of white supremacy. Any of those other topics, people would, be much more, mainstream to sociology than guns are normal and normal people use guns. That's going to keep me at Wake Forest. Not that I
wow,
want to leave.
wow.
I
So
think I'm not going to test that because I don't want to leave, but I
no,
believe that to
no,
be
you don't
true.
want to test that. Yeah, I totally get it. Um, yeah, and I'm glad you said that because I think it's people need to understand that there sometimes is a cost to doing interesting work like you're doing and for following your genuine curiosity. I mean, that's what a scholar is supposed to do. Um, and I'll just put a plug in here for any Republicans listening to this that are skeptical of tenure. I just think that that's the wrong attitude. I think that tenure is extremely important. I think it's just as important for judges. Just, if you read the Federalist Papers on why judges have tenure, it's because they're supposed to be insulated from, they're supposed to be able to follow the evidence where they lead. Now, there still is groupthink and there still is harmful, like, you know, um, dynamics at play that can squash dissent sometimes, but the fact that you have the ability to still pay your mortgage and do this kind of interesting research and take a risk like having this course sounds like a fascinating course.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it wouldn't exist without tenure. No adjunct could possibly do what you're doing, at
Yeah.
least not there. Maybe at Hillsdale College or something, but not
Right.
there.
Yeah.
Now with
Yeah.
gun culture 2.0, David, some of the most interesting weapons I've ever come across are these old Colts that you can fit in your pocket, like the 1908 pocket hammerless 25 auto, or
Hmm.
the 1903 35 AC 32 ACP that's pocket hammerless.
Yeah.
Um, when did I have to believe that they're developed for concealed carry, and actually those are very safe weapons because they have two safeties. They have the grip safety, like the 1911, and they have the thumb safety, just like the 1911.
Yeah.
And those are the kind of pistols that I would trust my life to if I had to. I mean, okay, take away the caliber, all you know-it-alls, but just take away the caliber consideration. I would not want to be shot by a 32 and certainly not 8 times. And
Yeah.
they're just in terms of it not going off, I would trust it not going off, no negligent discharge. But tell us what gun culture 2.0 is. Is it the case that there were these weapons that were designed for self-defense, but it just wasn't a common theme back then? Or when did the gun
Yeah.
culture 2.0 start?
Yeah. So, I think like all sort of demarcations like this, that they are a heuristic device that don't perfectly capture all of the nuances. And so I sort of do a demarcation of, I guess I had to backdate it to call it basically gun culture 0.0 because I locked myself into 2.0. But the foundational reality of guns in the United States that were used for um hunting and for home defense and for defense of the community, that was a reality in the United States, but almost unremarkable in the sense that people just, they were sort of tools, that there wasn't a lot of belief and symbolism built up around them in that early period. And I think that stretches into the 19th century, and then you do see the emergence of what we would call gun culture 1.0, that's more focused on recreational hunting and sport shooting. So you see people starting to hunt beyond what they need just for food. They hunt for sport. They engage in sport shooting, more formalized target shooting competitions and clubs. Back in, again, to go to some of Clayton Kramer's stories that he has captured from the historical record, you get some bored people, in the 18th century sitting around and they got a rifle. Pretty soon they're going to start seeing who can shoot the rifle better, right? who
Yeah.
can who can hit that tree stump 100 yards away over there, right? Or who can shoot the most squirrels. So there's a natural kind of element of that. But when it becomes formalized into, we have a shooting club, we have annual competitions, we have turkey shoots, we start to take glass balls and fill them with feathers, and shoot those when we can't hunt, to practice our hunting, and that becomes then clay target shooting. So, that whole, say, 1850 into, through a lot of the 20th century, this is kind of gun culture 1.0. Doesn't mean that there isn't, for some people, guns are tools that they have to shoot varmints on the ranch,
Yeah.
whatever. Some people who primarily have guns for self-defense, the
Right.
even before something like the pocket hammerless, if you 18th century derringers, small pocket revolvers, there's from the whole idea of having a pistol. A pistol is primarily a defensive weapon in the first place. It's just a matter of,
True.
finding a way to make it reliable and multi-shot. So
Right.
that's always there. It's just not as central to that kind of symbolic and systematized orientation to guns that I think characterizes a gun culture. Right, the mere presence of the gun doesn't make a gun culture. It's when it starts
Right.
taking on additional beliefs, norms, social organization.
Okay.
Um, and so when I talk about the rise of gun culture 2.0, it really starts in the 1960s. We can see a shift, in people's orientations much more toward, why do I own guns? What types of guns am I looking for? It's going,
Yeah.
more in the direction of defensive purposes. Which again isn't to say all of these other things. There's still people for whom guns are unremarkable tools that they're just have around because they need to do certain things. There are
Yeah.
people who hunt recreationally. There are people who are competition shooters, long range sniper. Like, there's so much diversity within gun cultures. There's sometimes I regret using this term gun culture 2.0 because it's easy for
Okay.
people to think, oh, all of gun culture is this. And,
Okay.
that's not the argument that all of gun culture is this. It's that the sort of center of mass, or the dominant orientation toward guns, focuses on their defensive use. At,
Right.
at the same time, all the other things exist. Many people have guns for multiple reasons.
Yeah.
But
And
whether
and
we're looking,
each of these designations, for lack of a better term, uh is a kind of a rough and ready generalization. It's true generalization that attempts to capture the why guns are normal or something. Was that a fair way to
yeah,
say
I
it?
mean, they all really focus on the normality of guns.
Yeah,
That's a common thread,
that would make it a
through them.
culture, kind of,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and also,
And
the idea that there's also always been negative outcomes with guns.
yeah,
Accidental death and injury and
yeah,
suicide.
right,
That's also there, but it's not the primary thing I think that's important to understand about guns, right? Because, if there are, 80 million gun owners and 400 million guns, and there are, less than 100,000, deaths at the hands of guns in any given year, most guns are not out killing people.
right,
And
to
that's,
say the least.
yeah.
Yeah, that
Which
would
isn't to say that it's not important to understand,
no,
those
yes,
deaths and
exactly,
injuries, but it
right.
is to say we're missing this huge reality
There
out
is,
there.
yeah, that's right. The way to contextualize it, yeah, I mean, take for example suicides, which is just horrible. I mean, it's just why anybody would want to do that is itself horrible, and then that particular way of doing it is horrible. the there are some people on my side of the political spectrum that might say something kind of callous, like they were going to do it anyway, or something like that. You take a gun away, they're going to do it anyway. They're going to find a way to kill themselves. And I don't really think that that's true. I think that a firearm makes it, if someone is in that position, a firearm makes it, I think, probably more likely, possibly. Maybe I don't know if I'd say probably, but I would say for some people it might be probably, than just jumping off a bridge, or, running in front of a truck or something, or taking a bunch of pills. Um, just like,
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know about women. I think for men that's probably true. I don't know about women, but for
Yeah.
I think women, based on what I've read, would rather take pills or something like that. But
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think
Definitely.
we need to pay more attention to that. So um,
Yeah, I think there's some things that you know, kind of the some of the things that sort of attract people to firearms also are correlated with reasons why, generally, sort of older white men, have so much gun suicide,
yeah,
because people who tend to own firearms also may tend to believe more in self-reliance. They may tend to be more individualistic. They prize their independence, right? And some of the big
that's
reasons
insightful.
why people commit suicide is, because they don't want to be a burden on other people, right?
That's true.
Or they, that they feel like their lives are not as useful anymore. Um,
Oh, wow,
and
that's
so,
true.
that there's that relationship there. There's a, kind of a correlation that's driven more by the beliefs than by the gun itself, and I think that's something that you have to really be sort of deep inside and understanding gun owners as gun
Wow,
owners and
right,
as people and where their beliefs are. Why is suicide so high in Alaska? I mean, is it because there's so many guns, or is it because the way Alaskans think, right? Why are you leaving
right.
Alaska? Because you want to be more free. You want
Yeah,
not to have people breathing down your neck. You don't.
yeah.
So,
But then that
I
comes
think
at a social cost
those are
too,
some
for
things that,
resources.
yeah, yeah,
That
yeah,
comes at a
absolutely.
social cost. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think, I oftentimes say, there's nobody who's pro suicide. But on the other hand, there was a struggle, that's been going on a long time for euthanasia. That
Right.
there are people who want it to be possible for people to say, hey, I don't want to live anymore.
Hmm.
And there are many gun people that I know who are like, it, pains me terribly that I've lost this friend, but is it my place to question their decision, that their life was not useful anymore? They didn't want to continue to live or be a burden on other people. So we
Hmm.
do, I think, to some extent think, you know, which is obviously not, I'm not endorsing suicide, but I'm
Right.
saying, like,
Right.
there are, a range of views there, and we want to prevent the ones that are preventable. But I would be pro euthanasia myself, you know
Okay.
if it was done in the right way. And I think that's the
Gotcha.
thing with that I think you're hinting. If you try to commit suicide in certain ways, it's harder. If you have a gun, it's
Right.
harder to take that back, right? You can take
Right.
some pills, cut
True.
yourself, cry for help, kind of situation.
Crawl up on a
But if
building. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. um so yeah, that's a bit of a morbid topic to get onto, but
Yeah. I
it
could
is
tell
a
you thought
reality.
about
And
it.
yeah, well, I do teach a segment on that, because that's part of the reality. It's part of what people are concerned about. And I don't want to just say, hey, this is all that's important about guns. These other things are unimportant. But, I feel like the way I approach it puts that in a different sort of context for people saying, and to say like gun owners, because suicide disproportionately affects gun owners, then gun owners also are disproportionately concerned about suicide,
Yeah.
and so that there are efforts, within the gun community to try to address suicide. So it's not like,
Right.
gun owners don't care about suicide and, oh, we're not willing to give up our guns to help, reduce suicide. Those kind
Right.
of sort of arguments I feel like are, really wrongheaded and don't really capture the spirit of, what gun owners are really like.
Do you feel comfortable? Well, if you don't feel comfortable, you could just not answer it or whatever, but do you carry a gun or
Yeah,
short
I mean,
weapons?
I have a concealed carry permit in North Carolina, and I mean, I don't carry where I'm not legally allowed to carry. I'm not one of those sort of, folks that are feel like, take the law into their own hands. But I totally understand people who take that approach. I don't condemn that. But for me personally, I carry where I'm legally allowed to carry, and I feel better for it. I don't expect that in 99.9% of the places that I go and the things that I do that I would ever need to defend myself with a gun. But if my wife and I are out walking around our neighborhood or in the city, or we camp, or we'll go to the grocery store, wherever. If I know that I'm not going to be in a place where I can't legally carry, I will try to carry when I can.
Does that make you feel safer? Does it make you feel less vulnerable?
I definitely feel safer. I don't have any illusions that, I'm going to be John Wick and I'll, be able to shoot my way out of any possible situation. And I definitely, I'm a risk averse person. And so I definitely think of all the, ways that things can go badly.
Yeah.
If my wife and I are walking, around downtown and someone comes up and says, give me your wallet and phone, I'm not just going to draw the gun and start blazing away. Probably the first thing I would do is give them my wallet and my phone and see if that resolves the situation. But if someone came up to me and held a gun, to my wife and said, give it up, then I have to
Mm.
start, thinking more seriously about, is this the moment that I have to try and intervene because I don't want to get shot. I don't want my wife to get shot. So I think that people
Yeah.
who are not, serious about people who are outside of sort of this gun culture 2.0, just it's that shoot first and ask questions later. And, certainly in any human community, including, knitters and, people who like to play bocce, there are idiots in every human community. And so if there are people who have guns, then a certain proportion of the people who have guns are idiots and will do stupid things. And there are documented cases of this, but they're fairly rare because every time someone does something stupid with a gun, it's on the news, and it's not running on the news 24/7, right? Every once in a while, someone will, shoot at someone shoplifting at a Home Depot, right?
Hmm.
That'll run on the news for a couple of weeks. But generally, people who, carry firearms for self-defense do, are, pretty prudent and responsible. And that's why we don't have a lot of cases for all of the millions of people, tens of millions of people who have concealed carry permits or who can carry legally in a permitless state. You don't have bad shootings.
Gotcha.
You do, but you don't have, in proportion to the number of people, who can legally carry firearms, it's not happening all the time.
So, is it legal in North Carolina for college campuses to have concealed carry permit holders carry
The
on the campus?
I I should know this. I know I mostly focus on Wake Forest. Wake Forest has posted no carry.
Oh, okay.
As a private institution, it can decide. So I think that that it's not like Texas here, but you can have a gun, I think, in your car at the University of North Carolina. I don't think you can carry a gun on your person on the University of North Carolina campus.
Okay.
Although, don't take my word for that. I should know that, but I just don't. Um, the
Have,
most, I
yeah,
think of college campuses generally as being, places you can't carry, which is
yeah.
overwhelmingly determined by my own campus.
Okay. Have you thought about red flag laws?
Not not in great depth. I mean, I think that if they can be done well in ways that offer protections, that they can can be potentially useful tools to keep guns out of the hands of people that we don't want to have guns. I see there's some legal action taking place down in Texas where it may be moving towards that the felon prohibition on gun ownership may be going down with the Bruin decision. Um, I personally, feel like one of the ways, if we're going to have a society in which guns are widely owned, we also should have ways to ensure that the people who have guns, that in reasonable restrictions, should be in place. So felons, drug addicts, domestic abusers, and then also potentially people who are experiencing short-term crises. There's some interesting things going on with sort of voluntary sort of self-prohibition. Like I've turned my guns over to someone to hold them for me if I'm, know that I'm experiencing some emotional crisis or, those kinds of things. So again, I think there are things that are happening within the gun community itself that are trying to address some of these problems without always making it a law. Like it's, I
Right.
think, there's a tendency among liberals or Democrats. This is a problem. What law can we pass to address that problem?
Yeah.
As opposed to saying, how can we maybe incentivize individuals to act in the way that we want them to act, or how can we give them options to act in the way that we might want them to act? To say, hey, you can store your guns at this gun store, no problem. When you feel like you're ready to have them back, we have a process by which you can get them back. The police aren't involved, the state's not involved. It's a private
Private.
transaction
Yeah.
that we do. So I think that
That sounds really
those are
smart to
some
me.
promising directions. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Because a
there's
lot of,
a hold my guns. So
yeah,
I was just say there's a thing called holdmyguns.org, which is trying to promote this idea. There's in some states have been developing databases. Like I think Washington State has one where you can go on and say, search who in my area is willing to take possession of my guns on a short-term basis, and it'll identify typically gun stores, some police departments, I think, though some people maybe have a reluctance to do that. But
yeah,
and it's not easy. I think if I'm a gun store, I'd want to have some assurances or protections that
sure.
if I take these in and then give them back, I'm
Yeah.
not going to be held liable for giving them
Right.
back.
Yeah. Yeah.
But those are
And then the
those are.
cost too. Is it a nominal cost? And if so, how
Yeah,
do you really make
right.
a profit? Got to have
Yeah.
some profit. I mean,
Yeah,
got to
potentially,
be
or
worth
it
it
could be
for you.
seen as a public service kind of thing. And I think that like a lot of gun stores
Real
are.
estate is expensive here in California, but
Yeah. Um, so anyway,
especially, yeah, yeah,
these
exactly.
are just some of the ways I think
Sure.
that some creative thinking
Yeah. Yeah.
can be helpful in ways that, and people who are the more involved you are with guns, the more you understand some of the subtle dynamics. And
Sure.
I'm oftentimes asked by like for just recently UC Davis's Gun Violence Prevention Research Center has a newsletter that is primarily directed toward clinicians, as I understand it. And they asked me to write something. And, so I want to write something that helps clinicians to understand, why, when something that seems very obvious to them, like you have this risk in your home, they're going to ask you about, how much do you smoke? How much do you drink? Do you have a gun? Why would gun owners be reluctant to answer that question or to engage in a conversation about that with a medical provider who, there's a lot of people who are extremely down on this, but I feel like, that depending on your personal circumstances, having a gun in your home can be very risky. If you're in an abusive relationship, alcoholism, but how do you create a situation in which patients feel comfortable talking
Yes.
about that
Yes.
with their doctors?
Totally.
So
Yeah,
that's
because
one thing I don't have the answer just yet, but I'm thinking about it.
ooh, I can't wait to hear what you come up with on that, because this is exciting to me, because a lot of folks that I run around with, we are just suspicious of bureaucracy in general. And it could be a private corporation bureaucracy. Just anywhere where the feeling is in a bureaucracy that it's not the Andy Griffith show over here. It's you don't know them personally, and even if you do, I happen to actually know the sheriff of Orange County. I've sat next to him in uh, fundraisers. I mean, I don't know him very well, but he would recognize me and remember me. And but there's a whole bureaucracy, and it's not just Andy's going to put your gun in a drawer. It's you might be afraid of them losing it, or miscataloging it, or just not getting it back,
Yeah.
and
Right.
or mistreating, like they're out shooting it, or whatever. And if
Yeah.
if it's a valuable gun, like a Colt Python that your granddad gave you, still in the box or something, has got the receipt from Montgomery Ward's or something. It's and then just the general feeling is that Sacramento is just kind of out to get you. And it's not because they know what they're talking about. It's actually, they don't know what they're talking about. And so I like that. I think the incentive issue is really helpful. You might actually end up saving a lot of lives.
Yeah,
So yeah,
potentially.
keep that up. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
There
Hey,
was one more question that I wanted to ask you, but I
yeah,
forgot what it
please.
was.
Okay, I was going to say I could probably take one more question because I see my
Sure,
alarm
yeah.
is going off here.
I
So
see mine is too. I can't believe we went this far into it, David. I thank you for coming on. Yeah, I
yeah.
cannot remember what I think the red flag one, and there was another one that I thought I should write it down and I didn't write it down, but it came. But I think we can just cut it off there. I've learned a lot from you, and I've really enjoyed being able to have this conversation with you, David.
Yeah, I have enjoyed it myself. I appreciate the opportunity as I'm non-Republican professor myself, but I
You're not
think
a
that we
professor? I'm kidding.
right. I think we have to, and I try to do this in class and any time I have the opportunity, and this has been great for that, is to model, civil discussion about guns. And, it doesn't happen enough. And I think if we, had more opportunities to
Yeah.
talk to each other as, fellow citizens, whether we disagree on certain things or not, that, just the shouting about guns is not getting us anywhere.
No, it isn't. And it only puts people in fight or flight, which is not a nervous system conducive to solving problems that don't need to be solved, or that can't be solved that way. You need to be in rest and digest, which is, I think, where we were the whole time. And I asked somebody I went to a talk last night with this Princeton guy. I asked him on the podcast. He was fumbling around. He's like, well, I'm not a Republican. And I said, if you were to be invited on the Dennis Prager show, you would not be expected to be Dennis Prager. It's the host that's Dennis Prager. You just be who you are. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what I love about that, is you were who you were. And I can be the Republican professor, and we can just have a great time. And wow, I just realized someone might think I'm Dennis Prager. No, I don't think I'm Dennis Prager. There is no
You're gonna talk
comparison
yourself into a
to
corner
Dennis
here.
Prager. He's irreplaceable. as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, thanks so much, David, for coming on. Professor of sociology at Wake Forest University, studier of gun culture, and incredibly interesting conversation partner.
I appreciate the time, and thanks so much. And maybe we'll do it again sometime.
Okay, that sounds great.
Awesome.